Gentleman from 17.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I would like to thank our chairman, gentleman from 32, for the way he conducted our State Affairs hearing and allowed testimony from everybody. We were there for 7 hours. We heard everybody who wanted to speak, and I learned a lot, and I appreciate that. I also want to say that I have a great deal of respect and appreciation for the drafter of the bill and his organization, because they met with me, they talked with me, and explained a lot of the background and basis for the bill. I think that the conduct of the proponents and the opponents in this very, very emotional issue was outstanding. And it is an emotional and challenging issue. Here's the reason. I think of the good representative from 11 and the circumstances that she described, and I think of the good gentleman from 28 who described a very similar concern in the committee when he cast his vote. But at the same time, I also think of the Boise State assistant professor who testified she was stalked by a student who appeared to have some mental issues and who carried a concealed weapon, presumably with a permit. I support the Second Amendment, and I think we as Idahoans support our guns and support the right to shoot them. Nobody's going to take them away. But we have to look at safety. Safety in conjunction with that Second Amendment right. And I note that the statement of purpose of the bill included safety. And that's really what the good lady from 9 and the good lady from 11 are talking about. In evaluating whether this is a safe bill, I have to look at what our leaders say at the university, and they're saying no. Our faculty are saying no. Boise State faculty, in fact, are emphatic about no, this will not help. And most of our students are saying no, although some at the committee did testify in favor. I also have to consider what we as Idahoans like, and we don't like top-down directives. And this is a top-down mandate. We also tend to not like unfunded mandates. And this is an unfunded mandate. And I know that there are those who refer and use our law and like clarity. And there have been a number of questions about the clarity of this law, which I know you're all aware of. So these are some of the reasons that I'm concerned and why I cannot support this bill. But I don't want to leave the debate and the wonderful hearing we had without sharing with you a couple of things that I learned. And one of them was that we have to look at, even with a concealed carry, are we making sure that the people who have guns are safe people? In other words, that they are not suffering from some kind of mental disability. And this is not something that is Second Amendment or dealing with another kind of emotion. This is dealing with the reality of safety. And even a national organization has recognized that. And Mr. Speaker, if I may read from Mr. Speaker, may I read from a quote from Mr. Wayne LaPierre? Without objection. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After the Sandy Hook episode, Mr. LaPierre was on Meet the Press on December 23, 2012. And I agree with what he says as follows. We have a mental health system in this country that has completely and totally collapsed. We have no national database of people with severe mental illness. He used a different term, but he was. And a lot of states are putting none into the record system. So when they go through the National Instant Check System and they go out to try to screen out one of these people, the records are not even in the system. I talked to a police officer the other day. He said, Wayne, he said, let me tell you this. Every police officer walking the street knows some mentally disturbed person that ought to be in an institution is walking the street because they dealt with the institutional side. They didn't want mentally ill in institutions, so they put them back on the streets. And then nobody thought, what happens when you put these people back on the streets, and what happens and what the consequences are. Ladies and gentlemen, a subsidiary problem with this bill is we are not addressing who gets these permits and the circumstances of these permits. And I asked the question at the committee hearing, I said, what do we do if somebody does have a serious problem? And there was never an answer given. I hope that we can address an issue like that in future legislation. And if I may refer to a bill that's coming over from the Senate, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
the gentleman may refer to a Senate bill.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do applaud the Senate and hopefully this body for beginning that process with 3 mental health facilities that have been proposed and I believe passed over at the Senate throughout the state. And the other thing that came up is I think there does have to be more security in our college campuses. I think there was evidence presented that there really was not the kind of protection and security present in some of our campuses. And I'm going to close by saying my kids went to public university, went to U of I for 6 years, over a 6-year period. I want my kids safe. And that's exactly what I told every speaker. I want my kids safe on that campus. I don't want somebody coming on that campus who, with a gun and start shooting people at random. And I want security, and that is my primary consideration to protect these kids, to protect the faculty, protect the employees, and protect any guests who are on campus. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further debate? Lady from 29.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with the good lady from 11. Security is always an issue, and I think maybe women, we look at security a little bit different than men do. However, I do know that if you contact the security campus police, they can escort you. But I would agree that security can be improved at every university and college in Idaho. I don't think, whatever your opinion of the bill is, I think we would all agree security can be improved. I have overwhelmingly received more emails that are against than in support. And I'd like to talk about one university specifically because the main campus is in my legislative district. ISU have done various polls. The student leaders did a poll. There were 19 present at that meeting and 17 voted to support. So then the students did a poll, and there are huge, much bigger numbers against this bill. So I just thought I'd share that. Also, the ISU faculty did a poll, and the majority of the faculty were against the bill, but there were some professors that did support the bill. Also, ISU, when we had the State Affairs hearing last week, mentioned with testimony that they thought it would cost $600,000. They have now come up that it would be $1.4 million, and they estimate with a $1.2 million would be ongoing every year for the cost of security alone. I'd like to share with you that I did ask the Fraternal Order of Police during testimony what their membership was, because we have gotten information from them, and I found out probably they weren't sure, but they thought maybe a third of the police officers in the state of Idaho were members of the Fraternal Order of Police. So to me, that meant maybe up to a third or less of police officers in Idaho support this Senate bill. The testimony was overwhelmingly against the bill. There were 3 college presidents and other administrators that did testimony and that were opposed. But at the end of testimony, it was mentioned that they, and when I say they, I mean educators, the higher education personnel, said that they would be willing to get together and maybe craft a new bill to where they could have some input into a bill. So when the university president and others mentioned that, I thought it would be nice if the educators could have input because it directly affects them. So I urge your no vote on this Senate bill. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 24.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen, thought I might first make a comment. When I first was elected, my good cellmate, my seatmate from 24, might be cellmate, from 24 admonished me, and I told you this once before, that I'm only given so many bullets to use on the floor, and I guess this is one of those days. As I've listened to the debate, I have some comments I'm going to make, but as I listened to the debate, a couple things that rang true with me is that I appreciate everything that the representative from District 9 and 11 have said, and I really can't find much fault with anything they've said, even the lady from 35. However, I have some comments I'd like to share with you as regards to my role in this House. Today is not much different than any other day on the House floor. We find ourselves defining the behavior and the limits of the rights of our citizens, as empowered by the Constitutions of the United States and Idaho. We do this because someone wants to further define our rights, while others want to see limitations. Limitations as excessive. We often hear about how our founding documents were divinely inspired, that the only powers granted to the government are those which were specifically granted to the federal government by the states, and accordingly by the people to the states. Yet each day we pass laws that define what those documents so simply state. Over the past 2 months, I have read and reread the Idaho Constitution on the issue of the right to bear arms. There is a clear statement that citizens have a right to carry arms, and it shall not be abridged. It is very clear and simply stated. It is written plainly in Article 1, Section 11 of the Idaho Constitution that people have the right to carry arms, but the state can place limits on concealed weapons. So here we are today defining what those limits should be. The violence we have seen in Virginia and Connecticut, Colorado, and other places around the country are not the result of lenient concealed weapons laws, but from deeply disturbed individuals who planned and perpetrated horrendous evil. Are we going to allow fear to infringe upon our constitutional rights? I would like to point out that if a bill was being presented today that only addressed the expansion of penalties on concealed weapons violations, we would likely have an outcry of Second Amendment supporters. Even if it is constitutional power of the state, consider that in this bill, The bill creates a more serious first offense penalty greater than penalties generally imposed on a first offense DUI. Why do we allow this intrusion on the Second Amendment? Is it because under the Idaho Constitution we have the power to set policy? We continue with personal limitations in the new section 183309. This bill establishes a limit on where people can carry concealed weapons. Yet it is asserted by many that open carry is allowed in these same places. If we were to offer this section as a standalone bill, we who purport to protect the Second Amendment would be in opposition. Yet this bill provides limits on gun owners to guide what we believe is good public policy: no concealed weapons in campus, dormitories, or public buildings with a capacity of 1,000 or more. This bill established that the risk is too great in dorms and large public facilities, but classrooms, eating facilities, small auditoriums are all acceptable venues for concealed weapons. This bill establishes by law what is an acceptable risk, but removes the ability for leaders of public colleges and universities to make a more specific risk assessment and appropriate policy for their campuses. It could be argued that this bill has gone too far and not far enough. For either reason, maybe it should be defeated. However, to gain some modest expansion of our freedom to allow enhanced concealed weapon permit holders and qualified retirement law enforcement officers to have access to some locations on a campus, we can rest comfortable that the new limits on these same individuals are not a reduction in their rights. If taken separately, gun rights groups would be all over this bill to defeat the individual restrictions. In fact, the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance on their homepage has suggested amendments to this very bill. I will not speak for them, but the suggested amendments address the enhanced restrictions and penalties. It would be so easy to prove one's support of the Second Amendment if we lived in Illinois or New York, where gun bills are a constant threat of our gun rights, and gun rights advocates are always on the defensive. A vote against these intrusions would validate a legislator's Second Amendment credentials. But by implication, a vote against this bill is a sign of weakness in the eyes of the Second Amendment supporters. The last technical point I'd like to make about this bill: if we're so certain that this bill, as purported by some, is a self-defense issue, or that having some level of legal concealed carry citizens on campus may actually reduce violent crime or support the suppression of a weapons incident, why must we indemnify the colleges from liability if there's a future incident on one of these public campuses? I do not believe this bill does anything but establish a policy giving a few people comfort in knowing that they can carry on campus. However misinformed, there is a general fear that we could be wrong. As a representative in the heart of the Golden Eagle country, I must vote no and support the opinion that this change in policy is not good for my district. I will work with any group to modify state policy as it relates to our colleges, as I do not believe that allowing concealed weapons carried by a properly permitted citizen is an enhanced risk to our citizens. This bill is not the solution, but definitely has raised the awareness that current law and campus policy is too limiting. When I took office, I also took an oath to uphold the constitutions of the United States and Idaho. This bill is constitutional. So is the law that it's modifying. Thank you for your patience as I attempted to explain how I cannot support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further debate? Lady from 5.